The courtroom was completely silent when the judge exploded in fury, banging his gavel so hard that the sound echoed off the walls like thunder. His bloodshot eyes fixed on the humble man before him, a construction worker still wearing his dusty work clothes. The judge shouted with all his authority, his voice reverberating throughout the crowded courtroom, making it clear that he would tolerate no excuses or explanations. The tension in the air was palpable, and everyone present could sense that something terrible was about to happen. The worker, visibly nervous and intimidated, tried to explain his situation, but his words were constantly interrupted by the impetuous shouts of the magistrate, who seemed determined to publicly humiliate him. But what this arrogant and despotic judge didn't know was that in exactly 15 minutes, a single phone call would completely destroy his career when he discovered who the real father of this humble man was, who was being so cruelly humiliated in front of dozens of witnesses. The simple man, his hands calloused from hard work, remained respectfully standing, even as the avalanche of insults and threats rained down upon him. His simple clothes and humble posture contrasted sharply with the judge's majestic robe and arrogant posture, creating a scene that perfectly symbolized the power gap between them. The magistrate continued his tirade, seemingly reveling in the vulnerability of the situation, unaware that he was digging his own professional grave. Sign up now because you've never seen justice served like this, and what's about to happen will completely restore your faith in the system, as the powerful finally get what they deserve. The revenge you're about to witness will be so satisfying and devastating that you'll want to share it with all your friends and family. This particular case will become a landmark in judicial history, showing that no matter how high someone thinks they are, there's always someone more powerful watching and waiting for the right moment to act. This arrogant judge's fate will be sealed in the next 15 minutes, and every second of this countdown will be filled with unbearable tension that will keep you glued to the screen until the very end. The worker being humiliated had woken up at 5 a.m, as he had every day for over 20 years to support his family with honesty and hard work. He was known in his community as a man of integrity, never in trouble with the law and always treating everyone with respect and courtesy. His only concern in life was ensuring that his 3 children had better opportunities than he had, studying in good schools and growing up far from the hardships he faced during his youth. He worked on heavy construction sites, carrying materials and operating machinery under the scorching sun. But he never complained about his situation because he knew he was building a better future for his family. But what was about to happen in that courtroom would be the most satisfying revenge you've ever seen, because finally, someone who deserved all the humiliation he'd suffered over the years was going to have his dignity restored in the most spectacular way possible. The judge who presided over that courtroom had a dark reputation that extended far beyond the corridors of the courthouse where he had worked for over 15 years. Colleagues whispered about his outbursts of rage, his questionable decisions, and especially his treatment of people from less privileged backgrounds who appeared before him. Experienced prosecutors and lawyers had witnessed his abuse of power on countless occasions, but none had the courage to formally denounce him due to his political influence and dangerous connections. He thrived psychologically on the humiliation of others, especially when his victims were simple workers who lacked the resources to adequately defend themselves. This judge had no idea he had chosen the wrong person to humiliate, because this time his victim had connections he could never have imagined in his worst nightmares. The powerful figure who was about to intervene in this situation had built a brilliant career over 4 decades, reaching the top of the judicial system through hard work, unquestionable integrity, and decisions that always prioritized justice over personal interests. This person held such a high position in the judicial hierarchy that a single word from him could influence the fate of any judge in the country, regardless of their position or political influence, because the person who was about to receive a call in 20 minutes had the power to end his career with a single signature, and more importantly, had every personal reason to do just that when he discovered what was happening. Comment if you've ever experienced injustice in the system, because what you're about to see will show that sometimes justice arrives in completely unexpected and devastatingly effective ways. The judge's initial contempt manifested itself cruelly and systematically from the moment the worker entered the courtroom. His eyes roamed up and down the man's simple clothes, creating a grimace of disdain that was noticed by everyone in the room. The judge made sarcastic comments about the worker's appearance, ironically questioning whether he knew where he was and understood the seriousness of a court of law. Every word was laden with class prejudice, evidencing an elitist mentality that considered people like the worker inferior and less worthy of respect. The judge deliberately prolonged each sentence, savoring every opportunity to demonstrate his supposed superiority, while the worker stood respectfully, trying to maintain his composure in the face of such public humiliation. But this was only the first humiliation, for the worst was yet to come, and every person in the room could feel the tension rising dangerously with each passing second. The worker attempted to explain his situation respectfully and humbly, removing his cap and speaking in a low tone to show reverence to the court. He explained that he had appeared punctually as ordered by the summons, that he had made efforts to resolve the matter administratively before arriving here, and that he was willing to comply with any legal order that was fair and proportionate to the situation. His words were simple but sincere, imbued with the honesty of someone who had never attempted to deceive or mislead the justice system. He attempted to present documents proving his good faith and his attempt to resolve the issue, but the judge did not even allow him to finish his explanation. The judge constantly interrupted him with derogatory comments, making jokes about his limited education and his ability to understand legal procedures. With each attempt to explain, the judge's tone became more aggressive and disrespectful, creating an atmosphere of utter intimidation. If you think this is already too much, wait until you see what he did next, because the real explosion of authoritarianism was just beginning. The judge dramatically raised his voice, making direct threats about the consequences the worker would face if he continued to waste the court's time with pathetic excuses. He slammed his gavel repeatedly on the table, creating a deafening sound that echoed throughout the room and intimidated not only the worker, but everyone present. People in the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, exchanging worried glances at the clearly disproportionate and abusive behavior they were witnessing. Some whispered among themselves about the injustice of the situation, but no one had the courage to intervene due to the absolute power the judge wielded in that room. Sign up, because this is going to get much worse. And what is about to happen will shock you in ways you never imagined possible in a court of law. The public humiliation reached completely unacceptable levels when the judge began making openly prejudiced comments about the worker's Latino background, sarcastically questioning his immigration status, and suggesting that people like him shouldn't have the same rights as real citizens. He made cruel jokes about accents, manual labor, and socioeconomic status, turning the courtroom into a stage for his demonstration of bigotry and elitism. The judge deliberately spoke loudly to ensure everyone in the room heard his degrading remarks, clearly preying on the shocked and uncomfortable reactions of those present. He questioned the worker's intellectual capacity, suggested he should go back where he came from, and made comments about how people in his social standing should be grateful for any treatment they receive from the justice system. At this moment, someone in the room was discreetly recording everything with their cell phone, and this video was about to completely change the course of events in a way no one could have predicted. The worker made a desperate attempt to regain some dignity in the situation, explaining in a trembling voice that he had served his country honorably, that he had contributed to society through his hard work, and that he deserved at least to be treated with the basic respect due any citizen. He mentioned that he had 3 children depending on him, that he had always fulfilled his legal and tax obligations, and that he had never disrespected any authority or institution. His words were charged with genuine emotion, but also with an iron dignity that not even all that humiliation could completely break. He tried to appeal to the judge's humanity, explaining that he was only trying to honestly support his family, and that he didn't understand why he was being treated so cruelly and disproportionately. What the judge didn't know was that every word was being broadcast live, to someone very powerful through a call that had been discreetly made by a concerned person in the audience. The judge categorically refused to listen to any further explanation, threatening the worker with immediate arrest for contempt if he continued to defy the authority of the court with his pathetic whining. He brandished his gavel like a weapon, shouting that his word was absolute law in that room and that no one, especially someone from the workers' lower social class, had the right to question his decisions or methods. The judge made specific threats of contempt proceedings, heavy fines that would financially destroy the worker's family, and even the possibility of deportation, despite having no concrete information about the man's immigration status. Each threat was delivered with palpable sadism, as if the judge were genuinely enjoying his victim's growing desperation. It was at that very moment that the phone rang with a shrill ring that cut through the tense air in the room, and the person on the other end of the line was going to definitively end this arrogant judge's professional life in a way he could never have imagined. The moment when the judge completely overstepped all bounds of decency and legality came when he decided to fabricate a contempt charge to justify the worker's immediate arrest. He shouted that the man had flagrantly disrespected the authority of the court, and that he would be arrested immediately so he could learn to show due respect to the American justice system. The judge called the bailiffs and ordered them to handcuff the worker in front of everyone present, creating a scene of public humiliation that deeply shocked everyone in the room. The worker became completely desperate, begging the judge to reconsider, explaining that he had only tried to defend himself respectfully and that he had never disrespected any authority. His pleas were desperate but dignified, revealing a man fighting to preserve his honor and freedom in the face of a blatant injustice being perpetrated against him. It was precisely at this crucial moment that the courthouse phone rang, with an insistence that could not be ignored, cutting through the screams and confusion like an alarm siren. The call he was about to answer would reveal the most costly and devastating mistake of his professional life, a discovery that would instantly transform his position of absolute power into one of vulnerability and total panic. The sound of the phone echoed through the room like an omen of disaster, And even the judge, in the midst of his fury, sensed something different about the urgency of that particular ring. Everyone in the room fell into absolute silence, as if instinctively knowing that this call would completely change the course of events. The worker remained handcuffed and standing, breathing heavily, as he watched the judge hesitate before answering, unaware that his life was about to be completely turned upside down by the next 60 seconds of the phone conversation. The air in the room was filled with tension as the phone continued to ring incessantly, creating an atmosphere of suspense that no one could ignore. The judge eyed the receiver as if it were a venomous snake, clearly irritated by the interruption of his moment of sadistic triumph, but at the same time intrigued by the persistence of the call. The court officials momentarily paused in the process of handcuffing the worker, awaiting instructions on how to proceed in this unexpected situation. The audience held their breath, sensing that something monumentally important was about to happen. The worker, even in his desperate situation, watched the judge's every move closely, as if instinctively telling him that this call could mean his salvation. The judge finally reached for the phone, his expression gradually changing from irritation to curiosity, unaware that the next few moments would define not only the worker's fate, but most importantly, the catastrophic end of his own judicial career. The judge answered the phone with his usual authoritative voice, hoping to quickly dispatch any administrative interruptions so he could continue his display of power. However, within the first few seconds of the conversation, his expression began to change drastically, going from irritation to surprise, then to visible concern, and finally to absolute panic that spread across his face like shockwaves. He began to stutter monosyllabic responses, his tone completely losing all the arrogance and authority he had displayed minutes before. The people in the room watched in fascination as the judge's demeanor completely transformed, now appearing a completely different person, vulnerable and desperate. The call he was answering came directly from the Chief Justice's office, informing them that the worker being humiliated was the adopted son of the Supreme Court's most respected and influential justice, a man who had dedicated 50 years of his life to building a more equitable justice system, and who would never tolerate any form of abuse or prejudice. The revelation struck the judge like a bolt from the blue, instantly realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the error he had committed. The Supreme Court justice was not only a respected figure, but also the mentor and personal protector of the worker, who had been adopted as a child after losing his parents in an accident. Let's decide if you want him fired or arrested, because what is happening now will define not only the future of this arrogant judge, but also set an important precedent for how people in positions of power should treat all citizens. The judge immediately understood that he had publicly humiliated the protected son of someone who wielded enough power to irreversibly destroy not only his career, but also his reputation, his future prospects, and his personal life. Every cruel word he had uttered, every gesture of disdain he had displayed, every moment of sadism he had savored was now being reported directly to someone who would never forgive such behavior. The judge's change of heart was instantaneous and desperate, but it was already too late for any attempt at recovery. He began mumbling pathetic excuses to the person on the phone, promising that it had all been a terrible misunderstanding, and that he had always treated all citizens with respect and dignity. His hands shook visibly as he held the phone, and sweat began to bead on his forehead as he realized that his 15-year career was being destroyed in real time by his own arrogance and prejudice. The worker stood watching the complete transformation of the man who moments before seemed to have absolute power over his destiny, slowly realizing that justice sometimes arrives in completely unexpected and devastatingly effective ways for those who abuse their position of authority. The full disclosure of the worker's identity spread through the courtroom like wildfire as the judge, in a state of utter panic, unwittingly revealed the details of the phone conversation he was having with the Supreme Court clerk. The worker was not only the adopted son of the country's most respected justice, but also a decorated war veteran who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, a man who had dedicated his life to public service even after returning from the war, working on public school and hospital construction. His humility and simplicity were not signs of inferiority, but reflections of an upbringing based on the values of service and dignity that his adoptive father had instilled in him since childhood. The consequences began to descend upon the judge like a relentless avalanche. His immediate suspension was ordered over the phone, an administrative proceeding was instantly opened, and a full investigation of all his previous cases was ordered to identify other possible abuses of power. The judge's public humiliation reached epic heights when the video of the hearing, which had been discreetly recorded by someone in the room, began circulating on social media with astonishing viral speed. Within hours, millions of people had watched the brutal display of prejudice and abuse of power, accompanied by the dramatic turnaround that showed justice being served in spectacular fashion. The comments were unanimously condemnatory, with people sharing their own experiences of injustice and celebrating the fact that an abuser of power was finally receiving the consequences he deserved. National media picked up the story and transformed it into a broad discussion about judicial reform, class bias, and the need for accountability for judges who abuse their authority. The judge's pathetic apology was completely rejected by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who publicly declared that such behavior was incompatible with the fundamental values of American justice. The protagonist, finally freed from handcuffs and treated with the respect he always deserved, received formal apologies from all the institutions involved in the case, but the revenge didn't stop there, because what happened in the following days was even more satisfying for all who believe in true justice. The Supreme Court justice not only ensured that his adopted son received full justice in his specific case, but also initiated a sweeping reform of disciplinary procedures for judges across the country. The worker unwittingly became a national symbol of dignity in the face of adversity, receiving invitations to speak at universities and civil rights events. His story inspired legislative changes that strengthened protections against abuse of judicial power, ensuring that other vulnerable citizens would not experience the same humiliation he had faced in that courtroom. The final consequences for the judge were devastatingly complete and irreversible, setting a historic precedent for judicial accountability. He was formally dismissed from his position after an investigation that uncovered dozens of other instances of abuse of power, bias, and inappropriate behavior throughout his career. Criminal proceedings were opened against him for violation of civil rights, abuse of authority, and conduct prejudicial to the administration of justice, crimes that could result in significant imprisonment and heavy fines that would completely devastate his financial situation. His license to practice law was permanently revoked, eliminating any possibility of him ever working in the justice system again, even in a private capacity. His reputation was so completely destroyed that he became a social pariah, unable to find employment in any field related to law or public service. The irony was perfect. The man who had attempted to humiliate an honest worker now found himself unemployed and publicly disgraced. The worker protagonist became a powerful symbol of justice and dignity, inspiring systemic changes that benefited millions of people in similar situations. He received not only full financial reparations, but also national recognition for his courage and dignity in the face of extreme adversity. Universities offered full scholarships to his 3 children, ensuring they had access to the best educational opportunities in the country. Civil rights organizations invited him to serve on judicial reform committees, where his unique perspective as a victim of abuse of power contributed to the creation of new protective protocols. The court, where the incident occurred, implemented dramatic changes to its procedures, including mandatory cultural sensitivity training, judicial behavior monitoring systems, and direct reporting channels for abuse of power cases. The systemic changes to the American justice system resulting from this specific case were profound and lasting, creating a legacy of protection for vulnerable citizens across the country. New judicial oversight mechanisms were implemented, including regular review of decisions by independent committees and mandatory evaluation of courtroom behavior. The story spread internationally as an example of how democratic systems can self-correct when injustices are properly exposed. The powerful moral about not judging by appearances resonated with millions of people, reminding everyone that human dignity and worth are not dependent on socioeconomic status, appearance, or origin. Share this video so more people see that justice still exists, and that those who abuse their power eventually face the consequences of their actions, no matter how protected they think they are.